Make accessible goals. Don't try to climb Mount Kilimanjaro when you barely walk in your neighborhood.
This is Collective Drift. I'm your host, Erica Vernay Knowles. This platform was created to celebrate all women, the beauty of their cultures, and international travel experiences. Welcome to Collective Drift.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with Nzingah. She is my wellness coach. She's a wellness coach and started me on my wellness journey a few years ago, and I'm about to jump back on it again. But she's a yoga instructor. She has an organization that helps entrepreneurs in Haiti. She lives here in South Florida in the Fort Lauderdale area. But Nzingah, how would you define yourself and what are you passionate about?
I would define myself as alchemist,
Mm-hmm.
Renaissance woman. I think that incorporates everything that I do. So if I go down the list, it gets really massive. So I'm a multidisciplinary artist, a holistic health consultant, yoga teacher, entrepreneur of 15 years this month. And healer.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds right. And your website is Yes Baby, I Like It Raw, which
Correct.
I love. That's your brand. And you're from, I didn't mention you're from Haiti. What part of Haiti are you from?
So I was born here in Southern Florida in Delray Beach. My dad is from La Tibonite and my mom is from Twin. So my dad is from the northern part of Haiti and my mom is from the south.
Okay, that helps a little bit. So speaking of your mom and speaking of Haiti, what did the women in your life, not exclusively your mom, but any women in your life, teach you about your culture that is important to you?
They taught me to be unapologetic about who I am and that I should be proud of where I'm from in terms of origin, and I should never make myself small in order to make other people feel good about themselves.
That's definitely important. I mean, especially I think, growing up in South Florida and being proud of the Haitian culture and growing up with someone telling you that and emphasizing, I think it's really important because I think definitely in the 80s, there were a lot of negative stereotypes before Haitian culture became a popular thing with like the Fugees and everything.
Those negative stereotypes still exist. I get called in to give workshops to help children like myself who
Mm-hmm.
are first gen or Haitian American find pride in who they are, because a lot of them are still being bullied because they're Haitian. And so unfortunately that hasn't ended, and that makes me really sad. And I think part of the issue is our parents are so busy assimilating that they didn't give us the tools to be proud of who we are in our history.
So what tools did the woman in your life or your parents give you that helped you be proud? And what are you teaching these kids in these workshops that you're working with today?
So I think my dad was definitely the stronger parent in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so like one of the things he was really persistent and insisted was that I speak Creole. And honestly, like I'm forever grateful for that, because I wouldn't be able to be a co-founder for a co-working space in Haiti if I
Right.
didn't have that in my toolkit, where I've led workshops on island and even virtually because of that. There was always this echo of you're Haitian, hold your head up high. And I was really engrossed in the Haitian culture in terms of how I was raised. Haitian food. My grandmother lived with us. She didn't speak English, so she really taught me a lot of things in terms of herbs and living. And those little seeds led to me being president of the Haitian Club in high school.
Oh, wow. So you mentioned your grandmother. What are and the and she taught you about different herbs and things. So what did you learn from her in regards to wellness? Since that is, you're a healer now, you're an alchemist. I imagine that may have started at home.
It definitely did. If any first gen will say that herbal remedies were part of their upbringing. So castor oil is definitely like the cure all in Haitian households. Oh, you have a fever? I'm going to rub you down with castor oil. When I was being presented with the symptoms from my autoimmune disorder,
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother was like, oh, you're having these changes in your coloring because you're toxic. So let's do a cleanse. And she made this concoction with castor oil, and I had to stay home for the weekend so that my body could flush out the quote unquote toxins.
Mm-hmm.
Cerci, we call it asoci, is another herb that we frequently use. That's a blood cleanser. So whenever we'd see a fever, that would be something that we would take, or if we were confronted with a cold.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes orange leaf tea. I mean, I could go down my list.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, my grandmother was like the woman who everyone get their postpartum herbal blend.
Right. And tell me
Because
more
in our
about that.
culture, after a woman has a baby, we bathe the woman, we do a sitz bath, and we actually wrap them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something I learned from my grandmother.
So I've noticed that like right now, especially like, when you talk about the postpartum herbal blend, like right now, like the veggie steams are really popular and people are doing them around their cycle or they're doing these veggie steam parties. Is that something that is typical within Haitian culture that you, in terms of what you've learned?
I can speak on this from two places. We don't vaginally steam in excess. And I feel like in the West, we find out something and we take a Western approach to it. Like we take prescription drugs, and there's certain things that you do according to if you're in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So with vaginal steaming, you'd see it being used postpartum. You would see it when a woman feels that her vaginal opening, for lack of better words, is not as tight as they want it to be, or possibly if they have an infection. But it doesn't look like anything what I see a lot of women here in the States who've just discovered it are using it.
Right. Now, I totally would agree because I discovered it, used it a few years later, and I was like, wait, I'm too tight. Like, why did I do that? That's not, this doesn't feel good. I'm like, try. So it wasn't the right time to do it. It was just like something, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're actually drying out the vagina and you want that area to be moist. You're adding external moisture, then you can throw off like the bacteria and yeast combo that your vagina needs in order for it to stay healthy. So
Right.
typically when we say CBBV or yeast or candida, it's because one of those things are out of balance. So that's why it shouldn't be something, oh, some people are like, I have vaginal steam every day. And I'm like, that's
Why?
not what you're supposed to do.
Right. Right. So tell me a little bit more about the things that you're teaching women now as a healer, as an alchemist.
One of the things I'm really big on is if you have a disconnect physically that is leading to some type of illness, you also have to inspect your mental and spiritual wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Because all those things are interconnected. And I typically like to use myself as an example. So not only am I the president of Yes Baby I Like Her, I'm also a client.
Right. Yeah, no, I remember when you like. So just to give a little backstory to the audience, so I have fibroids, and I discovered this back in like 2014 or so. And that was around the time when I met Nzingah, which I do not remember where we met or how we met. There's like a few people. It's like I feel like I've just known you forever.
Same.
And you helped me in terms of like this. Well, and I wouldn't just say, like you said, raw veganism. It's not, you didn't help me in terms of raw veganism, but you helped me in terms of a holistic wellness aspect. And it was like, okay, you need to journal, you need to practice some form of yoga, you need to meditate, and then you also need to do this cleanse. It's not just about this cleanse alone, but a physical cleanse, but it's also kind of a mental and emotional cleanse as well.
And I'm happy we're having this conversation because sometimes people only want me to talk about the physical part, and it's hard for me to disassociate the two. So I'll use my story. I have an
Mhm.
autoimmune disorder called scleroderma.
Mhm.
Scleroderma attacks your connective tissue. It showed up around, I was about 12 years old when I started to see the physical signs of scleroderma. So my body started to have scars. So I have like a huge it's like 12-inch scar on my left hip. And then the scars started showing up in the other places, but there wasn't any trauma.
Okay.
So I thought. So in my 20s, I also have a pituitary tumor. So I have a benign brain tumor, and I was diagnosed with PCOS. I decided to take my health in my own hands and approach it holistically. So that looked like seeing Chinese medicine doctors or so on and so forth. So when I informed my doctor that I had scleroderma, they were like, oh, that's a disease of fear.
What?
Exactly. That's what I said. What are you talking about? That's a disease of fear. And so when I humbled myself and really reflected it on all that I was dealing with when the autoimmune disorder presented itself, I was living in perpetual fear.
Mm.
My mother is schizoaffective. And so at that time, I was really understanding that my mom had a mental disorder. And on top of that, I was being molested. And I didn't have anyone that I could speak about how I was feeling. So I was internalizing everything. And so I always say to people, either you're going to work it out or it's going to wear you out. So because I wasn't processing what was happening to me in a healthy way, it led to my immune system to begin attacking my body.
Mhm.
And so now there are starting to have research that is actually showing individuals who've experienced childhood trauma have a higher propensity to have an autoimmune disorder.
Mhm. I mean, that definitely makes sense to me. Like if you're being molested at the time, you're dealing with your mother, realizing this what
Schizoaffective. At the time, they didn't
schizoaffect.
have that terminology. They said she was bipolar
Oh,
schizophrenic.
okay, so schizoaffective, and you're not processing it at all. So of course your body's going to process it. You're holding it in. And you were able to find that using these natural remedies. Did you use any like pharmaceutical remedies from your other doctors, or did you strictly go the holistic route?
I didn't start off holistic because I got diagnosed as a preteen.
Hmm.
So literally by the time I was 14, I knew I had the brain tumor, the autoimmune disorder, and the hormone disruption with PCOS.
Hmm.
So I had about 6 specialists. I could tell you what was my better arm for you to take blood. I was
Hmm.
taking all these medications. And because I present atypically with my autoimmune disorder, they sent me to and they were like, we would like to study you.
Oh, wow.
And so I was clear on what that might look like because I had read about the Tuskegee experiments, and I told my parents like that wasn't going to
Right.
happen. So in college, I decided to take a different approach because I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was exhausted with the medication. And so that's when I did a lifestyle overhaul. So a lot of times people only think of it was like, oh, she went vegan, but it was like I went vegan. I took away toxic beauty products. I went natural. I started going to therapy. I started doing yoga. I started doing my spiritual work. Like it was really a mind, body, spirit transformation.
Wow. I guess the question I always ask as someone who hasn't, so I would say as someone who hasn't continuously practiced these things on a regular basis, but am trying to, my question is, how long did it take for you to see taking care of yourself in this holistic manner becoming effective?
Within a couple of months, but it was definitely a struggle. And I always use I like to use my story as an example. I thought I could just stop taking the drugs, take some herbs, eat fruits and vegetables, and everything was going to be okay.
Right.
Nah.
Exactly.
I bled for a month.
No.
So one of my symptoms was I couldn't at the time have a period without some external help. So that looked like me taking Provera or birth control. And so that was the regimen I was on for just under a decade. So I got off and I went from having a period every month because of the assistance to bleeding for an entire 30 days. So I ran to my gynecologist, who'd been my gynecologist since my diagnosis. So we had a pretty good relationship. And he was very clear on my history. And he supported the shifts that I was trying to make. But he essentially said this: your body is now addicted to the birth control. And you can't just take it off cold turkey. You're going to go through major withdrawals. So he put me back on birth control, and I was taking it at a lower dosage. And what I had to do was then work with a naturopath who put me on a herbal protocol. So I found myself taking more things than ever.
Right.
Like I spent close to $300 on supplements and herbs and things like that. And so the goal was to take the supplements and wean myself off the medication, which I did. And then my goal was to wean myself off the supplements, and my food would be my primary medicine.
Okay.
And so that's where I am today.
Right.
I don't have like a strict herbal protocol because I've reduced the stressors. I'm very clear on what I need to do in order to maintain homeostasis. And again, it was a journey. So this transformation wasn't overnight. I started in 2001.
Okay.
Okay. I was 20. I'm turning 40 this year.
Okay. So don't beat myself up.
No. I think what I always tell people is don't let a bad moment take you off the path. Just let it be a moment. And your goal is to be a better version of yourself. When I work with clients, I feel like sometimes what gets in our way is our desire to be perfect.
Right.
And we overcomplicate things, and we are not compassionate enough with ourselves. So when we fall off the path that we wanted to take, instead of like dusting it off, we allow that moment to be our lifestyle when we know that's not what our body, mind, or spirit really needs for us to thrive in this life.
Absolutely. And I do want to highlight that you did mention, like, hey, you went back to your gynecologist. Like, if you're starting some a new practice, a new diet, a new anything, that you definitely should still consult your physician, because you're shifting things, especially if you have pre-existing conditions.
And I'm a really big advocate, and a lot of holistic people won't say what I'm going to say. I think holistic wellness and Western medicine can work together. I wouldn't be able to have the diagnosis for my brain tumor if it wasn't for the tools that they use in Western medicine for me to be able to discover it and identify it. But then I'm able to use holistic wellness practices to allow me to find a balance. And then I still go back to Western medicine to test my blood. Am I doing well? Are my numbers where they should be? And if they're not, what kind of ways do I need to shift? So a lot of times when people start dealing with holistic medicine, they aren't dealing it in they're not using best practices, So for instance, I'll use something like high blood pressure. One, don't just jump off your your medication. Two, you should be taking your blood pressure every day at the same time so that you can really see what's going on. It shouldn't be when you feel like you're having a headache or lightness of you're feeling lightheaded that you should then be taking your blood pressure.
Oh, got you. That definitely makes sense to me. So I want to shift gears a little bit, just slightly. Can you tell us about a time when you learned about or more about wellness in a different country?
I would say definitely in Haiti, I've been able to engross a bit more because I've been going more consistently over the past 3 years. So I'm learning more about those remedies. And then I would come back and speak to my grandmother because she would always go foraging for different medicinal plants here in America. So I could use the information that I was learning there and continue to apply it here in the States.
Okay. What
And
was
my
that in?
father's an herbalist too, so he's also someone I would bounce things off of.
You said your father's an herbalist as well?
Yes.
So what was that process like in terms of learning about things in Haiti?
There is some resistance. There's always like, well, why do you want to know this? And I think it's because most people like myself aren't interested in herbal medicine or even being in Haiti as much as I am. So I'm a bit of an anomaly and they don't always know how to take it. So it led to me being accused of trying to be a voodoo priest.
Oh, wow.
Because those are typically the people who know a lot about herbal medicine, and so that was really interesting.
Tell me.
It led to my mom like giving me a Q&A because she's like 7-day Adventist and was like, what are you doing? So that was just really interesting. I was just like, so what if I was? And so like that goes back to how external influences in the culture make a certain title seem evil, and not all people who practice voodoo are quote unquote evil. And a lot of those medicines or plant medicines and how they're to be used and what are their purposes are embedded within that aspect of Haitian culture. But because we've become Christian, we've been dismissive of it because we think it's associated with the devil.
Right.
Which is a whole different conversation in itself.
What's one of the most interesting experiences that you've had there? So like, can you walk us through one of those journeys of you learning and like the person that you interacted with, the place that you were at?
Well, I would say one of the things I was trying to learn how to make was the postpartum blend.
Okay.
And I was trying to get my grandma to teach it to me, but unfortunately, she transitioned from ovarian cancer. And I was in Haiti and I spent time with one of the elders there, and she took the time to really tell me about the nuances of it that I hadn't even gotten from my grandmother. So depending on certain types of conditions that might present themselves postpartum, the blend wasn't just universal.
Right.
And I thought it was, and I should have known better, because in my holistic practice, I believe in personalized medicine. I don't believe every herb works for everyone. So it reaffirmed that for me.
That's interesting. What was she like?
She is awesome. She was awesome because she was raised in Haiti. Then she moved to the States and decided that she wanted to go back home.
Okay.
So then she was able me to walk through what I'll actually be able to have access here in the States.
That's interesting. And then I want to shift a little bit more into travel. Can you tell me about one of your favorite experiences abroad, and what are some of the things that you enjoyed in that country?
That's hard because I've been doing a lot of traveling up until this moment. I went to Ecuador last year, and I was supposed to go this year right before they shut everything down.
Right.
And that was really nice because I went to the middle of the earth, and that was a nice experience. There's this point where you can actually lay an egg on a plate and it won't fall over.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Even a plate, I think, is a nail. And so it's just interesting to see how gravity is at play when you're like smack at the middle of the equator or close to the equator. So they've created this whole experience around it, but the actual center is a few miles, like a mile away, but it's like in the mountains. They made this park for people, for tourists like myself, to come to and experience the middle of the earth. I've actually had a lot of great experiences in Haiti. I went to Cap Haitian and had the opportunity to explore Monterrey, Mexico was really interesting. I sometimes take for granted that I am Black, and that everyone knows what a Black person looks like. And it was in Monterrey I was reminded that no. So little kids would point to their parents and then point to me and be like, oh my gosh, she's Black. That was interesting. I plan to have more travel this year. I'm not quite sure how that's going to pan out.
Yeah, me too. I'm literally supposed to be in Germany right now.
Yeah, I'm literally supposed to be in Thailand in a couple weeks from now.
Oh man, I love Thailand. So speaking of this period that we're in right now, we're in the midst of this COVID-19 quarantine, the coronavirus. What are 3 things that you would recommend to women that are starting their wellness journey during COVID-19?
Make accessible goals. Don't try to climb Mount Kilimanjaro when you barely walk in your neighborhood.
Really?
Yeah, because that's why so many people feel their wellness journey, because they make these huge, unmanageable, unaccessible goals because they're not taking into account where they are in this moment. So make small goals so that if you surpass it, you're like, yeah, what's next? As opposed to saying you're going to run a full marathon when you come out of COVID. That doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. You're right.
So make really smart, accessible goals. Another thing I would say is don't sleep on the simple things. Because they sometimes have the biggest impact on our health. And so rest is really critical to our well-being. Hydration is really critical to our well-being, eliminating processed foods and eating fresh fruits and vegetables. And a lot of people just take those things for granted. And if they just employ that, it would reap so many rewards.
Absolutely.
Third, find a community that's going to support you on that journey. So the accountability partner that's going to not question what you're doing, but encourage you to push further. And that community might not be your family or friends. It might be a digital community, but your success rate will be a lot higher if you have community. Part of the reason I think I was successful in my transition into a plant-based diet was my boyfriend was vegan.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Definitely. Yeah. Because when you have, I can personal experience, if you have a partner that is not eating the same way that you are, it's definitely a lot more difficult to start that journey because they're like, hey, do you want some ribs too?
Exactly.
Okay. So you said, so that you've got your 3 things is, don't try to have unattainable goals. Do something that's attainable to you. Remember the small things matter, and have a community. And I definitely want to highlight that you do create communities for people that are on their wellness journey. I want to ask you before we wrap up, you live in South Florida. Are there any of your favorite places or things to do, wellness spots, food, whatever, arts? What are your recommendations in South Florida?
I love the beach, and I recognize that a lot of people in South Florida don't take advantage of going to the beach.
You are so right.
And it offers so much. You can get your vitamin D, you can cleanse yourself spiritually. We got going into that sea salt water is like spiritually is a great cleanse. So I think I'm always encouraging people who live here, go to the beach as much as possible. I'm really salty right now because I can't go to the beach. There's a really nice park in Boca Raton that I love that ties into the beach. It's called Gumbo Limbo. So that's a place I love to go. I like the local parks as well. I walk to one in my neighborhood and lay in the grass and read a book. Again, we take these things that we have for free for granted, and we live where people vacation.
Yes, indeed.
And then there's a list of museums and other things that we could go to, but I feel like we need to spend more time out in nature. And so those are my favorite places and my top recommendations.
In South Florida. Okay, and what about your recommendations in Haiti?
So there's Bassin Bleu, which is a waterfall in Jacmel. There is Citadel, which is a fort we have in Cap Haitian. Those are 2 places, and there's more, but those are 2 places. If you can get to them, I definitely suggest them.
Okay, awesome. And then my second to last question is, if you could ask a question to all women, what would that question be?
How are you loving yourself? Are you loving yourself like you're loving everyone else?
And how would you define a woman?
Really?
Yeah. What is the definition of woman for you?
Ooh, that's like a poem for me. This is sweet, sour, strong, vulnerable, made of stardust and a little bit of the heavens. We're complicated.
I love it. You know what? I did not mention that. And you didn't mention either. Like, you're also a poet and an artist.
I am. 2
That's
albums deep.
Right? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But thank you so much for joining us today and being on Collective Drift. How can people reach you?
They can find me on yesbabyilikeItraw.com. That's my website. They can find me on Instagram at yesbabyilikeItraw.com, or just Baby I Like It Raw, I should say.
Okay.
And they can always email me at info@justbabyilikeItraw.com.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Nzingah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to that episode of Collective Drift. Didn't Nzingah drop us so much knowledge about wellness? I mean, it was just an amazing episode. I truly enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it like I did, please remember to subscribe to this podcast, like it, and definitely leave a comment if you're feeling generous. You can follow Collective Drift on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook as well. Everything is Collective Drift, so let's keep it quite easy for you. All right, well, have a wonderful day, and remember to be gentle and kind to yourself during these times. Ciao.